Aloha, everybody. My name is Keoni Lorenzo. I was born and raised in the community of North Kohala on the island of Hawaii. Growing up here and getting to spend time at Kamehameha schools, I've been exposed to the Hawaiian culture and all the practices embedded into it, such as sustainability, restoration, and resource preservation of our native Hawaiian plants. I learned the arts of farming, fishing, voyaging, hula, and other Hawaiian practices. My tutu, or my grandmother, Kukauhi, she was a kahuna la'au lapa'au, or a Hawaiian medicinal practitioner, whose love for the Hawaiian plants and the environment was passed down to my father and ultimately passed down to me. She exercised traditional Hawaiian healing practices and well-being instilled in her by her ancestors. And years later, when my father was born in a time in which the world disregarded the health and well being of our environment and any native practices therein, his connection to his ancestry and culture was largely severed by the colonial climate of Hawaii society. Yet the values and the relationship with the Aina that my grandmother had instilled within him continued to be the foundation of his identity. This is where my love for the land is rooted into. And so, through such aloha for the natural environment and the guidance from my tutu and my father, who played a massive role as teachers in the field, I became passionate about continuing the Hawaiian culture and the many practices. I pursued the cultivation of kalo and preserved the different varieties. The harvest was shared amongst the community and given back to the place and people that I call home, while also learning ways to better my skills in farming through active participation in hands-on learning and community-based activities of sustainability. From here, I became heavily involved with native bird photography, which further reaffirmed the significance of our native plants to the ecosystem, Hawaiian culture, and the world that we live in. Getting to capture these species in their natural habitat, living in harmony with the many native plants like ohia, koa, and a'ali'i, allowed me to realize that we are linked to the forest just like these birds. It is the foundation of the Hawaiian culture, as every practice from hula to voyaging to farming is all dependent on native plants. This firsthand experience in the forest drove me to pursue internships that advocated for environmental conservation. And so I took part in kupu around Kohala Mountain with the objective to clear invasive species and outplant native plants in those areas. With this distribution of native species, I started to take notice of native birds returning to these places. It was clear that the need for reforestation and preservation of native plants was evident, driving me to take the initiative within my community and on the land that I grew up on. And so I began cultivating native plants like a nursery with the goal to reforest my home, starting with 300 saplings of ohia, koa, and a'ali'i. From there, I started to grow my seeds from the native forest that I came to know. And after reforestation, again, I witnessed native bird species returning to places that they had not been seen before. Um, and so my seed story begins in the forest, the home of these native birds, and the core in which we thrive through the watershed and habitats it creates. I went to the forest that I became close with as I spent many hours looking for birds and outplanting native species. The ohia tree was dominant in this area, covering the land with its beautiful red flowers. And getting to know the diversity of the plant and the role that it plays in the ecosystem, I started to observe the tree each time that I came to visit. And so I began to see the red petals scattered all over the ground. And that's when I realized the ohia was starting to seed. The native birds slowly stopped feeding on the flowers, and that's when I knew the seeding process has commenced. And after a short while, I went along from tree to tree, just gently collecting seeds into a jar from each flower capsule. And after collecting the seeds, I did a short protocol of thanks to the forest, something taught to my father and passed down to me. And from there, I brought it home and stored it while I prepared for vegetation. I quickly created a pan filled with moss that was soaked in water and sprinkled the ohia seeds. And during this time of growth, I watched them every day, waiting for the first seeds to sprout. And I started noticing the saplings bursting through the moss in about 3 weeks. And so, with the active watering and direct sunlight, the seeds from the forest were now their own grove of new plants to be sent back into the world. I was able to germinate and establish about 50 ohia plants that are set to be outplanted. And to me, this is more than just collecting seeds and planting species. It's about preserving culture, tradition, heritage, and saving an ecosystem and all its inhabitants while protecting our future as communities sustain to the life of native plants. And I was able to learn from the plant and what it means to me as a practitioner of the Hawaiian culture. And so the reforestation and ecological preservation taught me to be a part of the environment and feel as if I was a seed and someday will be like one of these trees. I felt like I was walking in the footsteps of my tutu by going into the forest and collecting the seeds from the native plants. And so like the seed is like a teacher. It shows you how to grow and teaches you how to care for the environment. And my father once told me, if you take care of the plant will take care of you. And this proverb stuck with me on this journey of preservation. And so the outcome of the seed and forest preservation is a template for any subject. The dynamic between culture and curriculum can be molded by learning from the native plants and their connection to the world. Teachers play a huge role in exploring the field and applying it in their teachings, planting seeds within each student and watching them grow into trees of abundance. Um, my tutu and father were my teachers, playing a big role in shaping this direction and opening my eyes to ways I can give back to the environment and my community. So an Olelo no Eo taught to me, or Hawaiian proverb, is Nana Ike Kumu. This proverb literally translates to look to the source. But diving into the Hawaiian perspective and epistemologies, we can understand that this proverb calls for us to look at all things that give us life. In the Hawaiian language, kumu means source and purpose, but it also translates to teacher and tree, directing us to understand the relationship between us to the source of life found through the trees of our environment and our teachers who planted the seeds. Nana ike kumu. Mahalo nui.